Now in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, we began last week with this tremendous section on at least an individual or some that were at Corinth who were into fornication to the end that one would even have his father's wife. And instead of really being concerned about it, they were so caught up into their, allegiance to certain leaders at Corinth and puffed up with pride over some of these leaders that they never did anything about individuals that were doing some things that were contrary to the Word, and consequently, Paul had to write to them and tell them that there were certain individuals that ought to be delivered unto Satan, which meant to cut them out of the fellowship. It's not something you do to everybody you have a little bit of problem with in your twig, but it's something that if there's someone there who just is constantly belligerent, he's constantly teaching against the Word, harassing the believers deliberately and will not be reproved, finally you reach a point at which that person is cut out of the fellowship. And we got as far as verse 9 in this 5th chapter, where it says, I wrote unto you in the epistle, not to company with fornicators. And I showed you how that word company is only used 2 other places. One is in verse 11 in this chapter, and the other is in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 14. And in 2 Thessalonians, it also talks about not having fellowship with certain people, but that they learn to eat their own bread with quietness and so on. And you don't treat them as an enemy, but you admonish them as a what? Brother. And if you look at Thessalonians, you see in chapter 2, it's talking about the son of perdition who sets him up in God's throne, in God's temple, and gets people to worship him, which is the end result of all idolatry. And so this really ties into that very nicely. It says, I wrote unto you in the epistle, not in just any old epistle that he wrote, but into the epistle. And 1st and 2nd Thessalonians were the only epistles, church epistles I'm talking about, that had been written prior to this, with one exception, and that was Galatians, which was written just shortly before this. And so perhaps that did not have time to reach all the churches. But every epistle that Paul sent out that was a church epistle and designed to be part of the canon of God's Word was an encyclical, which meant that it went not just to one church, but it went to all the churches. Copies of it were made, first in Aramaic and then translated into Greek and circulated among both groups of people, those that spoke Aramaic, those that spoke Greek. And so this particular epistle to the Thessalonians, the second one, had been in circulation for some time, and the Corinthians would have read it. So it fits very nicely. I wrote unto you in the epistle not to company with fornicators, yet not altogether with the fornicators of this world, or with the covetous, or extortioners, or with idolaters, for then you must needs go out of the world. You'd have to say, stop the planet and let me get off. Because every place you go, you've got this breed of people. But now I have written, or again, it's the same in both Aramaic and Greek in the past, I wrote unto you in that epistle, in other words, in Thessalonians, not to keep company, and there's that word again. If any man that is called a what? Brother. A brother. Not talking about every fornicator and so on in the world, because they're all over the place. But I'm talking about a brother. Someone that's born again, who's part of the fellowship. If he be a fornicator, or a covetous, or an idolater, or a railer, or a drunkard, or extortioner, with such an one, no, not to what? Eat. And remember, Thessalonians, that was one of the key things. Tell them to eat their own bread with quietness. You don't treat them as an enemy, but admonish them as a brother, that they learn, see? And here you have the same idea being communicated. You don't even eat with them. And the reason you don't eat with them is because of the covenant of salt, because you would eat food that had salt in it, and whenever you did that, it meant you were taking the covenant of salt with that individual. That's why you don't eat with people who are doing things contrary to the Word. But yet you can't totally divorce yourself from all people, and all fornicators, because you'd have to leave the world, as he says. That's not what he's talking about. He's not talking about people outside of the body. He's talking about those that are supposed to be believers, brothers, with such that really get way off in left field, that are advocating things contrary to the Word. You cut them out of the fellowship. Don't eat with them, that they learn not to blaspheme. Now here's a situation, and that's another reason why I want you to look at that prolegomena on ethics, if you can, because it's an ethical situation. Matter of fact, all of chapter 5 and 6 really get into some of the heart of Christian ethics. Here's an individual. One of the principles in this book, The Lifestyle of the Believer, is that the individual is worth something. Every man is an individual in himself and is never a means to another man's end. It's not society that's so important. It's the individual that's important. In communism, it's a society. But it's the individual, biblically, that's important. Now, that individual that's causing corruption in the body, he's causing, first of all, other individuals to lose out on their rewards. So those individuals are vitally important. In the second place, this individual is cut out of the fellowship. That he dies? No. Not to deliver his, what did it say? For the destruction of his flesh. It's for the destruction of his fleshly desires. That, as Timothy says, he may learn not to what? See, as an individual, he's still so important, he's not learning anything in the fellowship. So what do? Cut him out for a little while, that he learns something. It's still that individual's life that's important. Do you see it? That individual is still important. That's dealing with one of the principles of ethics. Now, in this verse, as well as verse 9 and 10, and some of these you have repeated, you have fornicators. And fornication is used of those who are doing physical fornication, extramarital, premarital, homosexuality, perverts of all sorts. It's also used of spiritual fornication, where you whore around with other gods. And they usually tied together in biblical cultures. Because at Corinth, you had the Acrocorinth, where they worshiped the 1,000 whores and all the idols that went along with them. Or covetous. The word covetous is desirous of gain, greedy. If it's in the category of sex, it would be greedy for more sex, till finally you get to the place that you just can't get enough. Or in the category of gods, it's greedy for other gods, more than the one true God. And all the other categories, covetous. Or an idolater, specifically idolatry, worshiping of other gods, pagan gods. The next word in verse 11 is railer. A railer is one who abuses others verbally, like they railed on Jesus. They abuse others verbally. They defame you. They write things about you in the newspapers. They do it in deprogramming, defamation of character. They abuse you verbally. Drunkards, I don't think you have any problem with that one. You know what it is. Extortioners. An extortioner, this word is used of anyone who took something by force. Deprogramming would be in that category. Stealing. and sexually, rape would be in that category. So those who are in that category, all those different areas, and these are simply representative of so many things that do tie into idolatry. He says, cut them out, unless they want to come back to the Word, of course. But we're talking here about someone that's very belligerent. He doesn't want to come back to the Word. He's been reproved, but he refuses to, and he's constantly harassing the believers. And remember, there were certain other qualifications that you had to have in order to do this. It's not something you do every other day in twig. Now, verses 12 and 13a are a parenthesis, because he deviates from the subject briefly to talk about judgment of outsiders. He's talking before this about judging those that are in the body, a brother. But he says in 12 and 13a, for what do I have to do to judge them that are without? Do not ye judge them that are within? But them that are without, who does the judging? When? In the future, at the return. At the second resurrection, he's going to judge those fellas. But we're concerned about judging those within the body, within the household of believers. It says, I don't have anything to do with those that are without. In the Aramaic, that second question in verse 12, by the way, the first one is that erotesis again, a rhetorical question. The second one is a statement in the Aramaic, or it's rather imperative. You judge them that are within. It's a statement, a fact, or an imperative, a command that they should judge those that are within. In Murdoch's translation, he translates this verse, and Murdoch, by the way, translated it from the Aramaic. For what business have I to judge them who are without? But those within the body judge ye. See how he makes the second one a command? Lamza, he translated from the Aramaic too. For what business have I to judge those who are outside the church? But you may judge those who are within the church. But those who are outside, God does the judging. See? The Jerusalem Bible, although it translated from the Greek, made both of them statements of fact, and I thought it captured the heart of it very well. It says, it is not my business to pass judgment on those outside. Of those who are inside, you can surely be the judges. Makes it very clear, doesn't it? So, that first one at least is a question. The second one should be more of a command from the Aramaic. Should be a command. You judge those that are within, but not those without. What do I have to do with those that are without? God's going to judge them in the future. I'm concerned about the body. Now, do you see the deviation here, how he deviated from what he was talking about to talk about those that are outside? Because the Corinthians were thinking, like so many other people, well, whenever it talks about these fornicators and all this, it's talking about other people, not the believers. No, he's talking about people right in the fellowship. That's where we've got to do some judging and help people. God's going to judge those others. In Jude, verse 4. Jude, verse 4. For there are certain men crept in unawares, who were before of old ordained to this condemnation, ungodly men, turning the grace of God into lasciviousness and denying the only Lord God and our Lord Jesus Christ. They were certain men crept in unawares, got into the body and started harassing the believers with other doctrines. In verse 8 it says, likewise also these filthy dreamers defile the flesh, Despise, defile the flesh sounds like Corinth, doesn't it? Despise dominion. How about leaders in the church? Sound like Corinth? And speak evil of dignities. Same thing. In verse 11. Woe unto them, for they have gone in the way of Cain, and ran greedily after the heir of Balaam for reward, pay, rather than looking forward to future rewards. Sounds like chapter 3 of Corinthians. These are spots. Here you go, verse 12. Spots in your feasts of charity, when they feast with you, feeding themselves without fear. And whenever you eat together, it's the covenant of what? He told them, don't let them eat with you. Don't let them eat with you. Down in verse 16, these are murmurers, complainers, walking after their own lusts, and their mouth speaketh great swelling, having, here you go, men's person in admiration because of advantage. Does that sound like 1 Corinthians 3 and 4? Having men's person in advantage, glorifying or lauding one man, one teacher, over another. That's what was happening at Corinth. It happened in other places, as you see, later on, and perhaps to a greater degree later on. Back to 1 Corinthians. So we don't have anything to do with judge those without, but we're talking about right here in the body. And that's what Jude was talking about. Those right here in the body. But those that are without, God's going to do the judging. Now, leaving that parenthesis, reading from verse 11, with such an one, no, don't even eat with them. And go to 13b, therefore put away from among yourselves that wicked person, or that wicked one. It's just the word wicked in both Greek and Aramaic. It means the wicked one. And the word therefore is not in Greek or Aramaic. It has the word and. However, many of the Greek manuscripts even omit the word and. And I think it ought to be omitted and just started out, because the parentheses is over. Now we jump back into what we were talking about before. Put away from among yourselves that evil. And this word evil is the Greek word poneros, P-O-N, long E, R-O-S. There are 3 Greek words for evil. If you want to know what they are and what each of them is and some of the details about it, I suggest you listen to Sunday night service tape 980. But one type of evil emphasizes the destructive aspect of evil. That's one Greek word for evil. Another emphasizes the harassing aspect of evil. In other words, all evil harasses people. And the other word emphasizes the unproductive aspect of evil, because all evil doesn't produce anything except headaches. No rewards for it. This word poneros is the one that emphasizes the harassment aspect of evil. And it's real neat, because what were those people doing at Corinth? They were harassing the other believers, verbal abuse, tearing the other believers down, getting them to walk contrary to the Word, harassing the believers. So, reading again from verse 5, says, I wrote unto you not to keep company if a man, a brother, is called these things, with such an one. No, you don't even eat with him. Put away from among yourselves that evil one who harasses people. Furthermore, that quote, that latter part of verse 13, put away from yourselves that wicked person, is an exact quotation from Deuteronomy 17:7. So it's the figure of speech gnome, G-N-O-M-E. I'd like you to look at Deuteronomy 17:7. Because this being a quotation, first of all, makes it emphatic. And seeing where it is in Deuteronomy in the context of the verse makes it even more emphatic. Deuteronomy 17, verse 7. The hands of the witnesses shall be first upon him to put him to death, and afterwards the hands of all the people. So thou shalt put the evil away from among you. Now, go back to verse 2. If there be found among you within any of thy gates which the Lord thy God giveth thee, man or woman, that hath wrought wickedness in the sight of the Lord thy God in transgressing his covenant, and hath gone and what? Served other gods, and worshipped them, either the sun or moon or any of the host of heaven, which I have not commanded, and it be told thee that thou hast heard of it and inquired diligently, and behold, it be true and the thing certain, that such abomination is wrought in Israel, then shalt thou bring forth that man or that woman, which hath committed that wicked thing, unto thy gates, even that man or that woman, and shalt stone him with stones till they die. At the mouth of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses shall he that is worthy of death be put to death, but at the mouth of 1 witness he shall not be put to death. The hands of the witnesses shall be first upon him to put him to death, and afterward the hands of all the people. So thou shalt put the evil away from among you. What's the context? Worshipping other gods, idolatry. And what do you do with a man who's doing that? Stone him. Now that was Old Testament. Within the family. He's not talking about the Gentiles. He's talking about Judeans, Israel. The whole 12 tribes. Back to Corinthians. That makes this a very strong statement. And coming after he's talked about delivering them to Satan for the destruction of their fleshly desires. All these practices that were going on at Corinth related in some fashion or another to idolatry, fornication, railing, drunkenness. They drank wine till it flowed out of their idols. Extortion. All these different practices related to idolatry. Now, if one was an idolater, according to the Old Testament, he was supposed to be put to death. Now, Paul never tells them that. God never tells them that in His Word. He says, cut them out, that they learn not to blaspheme, or that they get rid of their fleshly desires. If they don't want to, then just let them stay. Walk in hog country. See? But look how strong that gnome makes this. Isn't that something? See? Plus, it's separated by the parentheses. So it's like he just deviates for a little bit, then comes back with a boom! A real big quotation from the Old Testament. And if they knew the Old Testament, which a lot of them did, they knew what that one was talking about. It was strong. It had an impact. You know, if you quoted something today and you knew what it was quoted from, it might have the same impact as this gnome did for them. And it should have the same impact for us. In other words, we ought to know the Old Testament. We should know the Word, shouldn't we? You bet. Don't just learn these things by studying once a year. or during Bible week. You got to read it at least 51 weeks out of the year, okay? Now, then he comes to verse 1 of chapter 6. This "dare any of you" is really weak in my thinking. It's an abrupt interrogative, and it marks an outburst of indignant feeling. In the first place, it's a rhetorical question again. And the sense of it is, like the Jerusalem Bible has it, "How dare you?" The Jerusalem Bible says, "How dare one of your members take up a complaint against another in the law courts of the unjust instead of before the saints?" In other words, I don't judge the unbelievers. That's what he said back in chapter 5. He says, God's going to judge them. You judge those in the body. Now we got another problem. How dare you take your problems to the unbelievers? The word "matter" in this verse is a legal term in Greek, which means a lawsuit or a case, a matter of contention or dispute. It's a legal term. How dare you having a lawsuit or a case or a complaint legally against another? Go to law, and that word is a very familiar word, krino, K-R-I-N long O, which you've had before, which means to pronounce judgment. And before you can pronounce judgment, you're supposed to examine by investigation, remember? But you krino before the unjust. Now let me ask you a question. According to 1 Corinthians 2:14, how are you supposed to examine by investigation before you arrive at a judgment? Spiritually. But if you go before the unjust and not before the saints, what kind of a decision are you going to get? Or what kind of an examination by investigation are you going to get? Sense knowledge, carnal. And sense knowledge and examination and judgments lead to division, whereas spiritual judgments lead to unity. This is the year of unity. This is the thing at Corinth. There was too much division, not enough unity. And one of the things was they were taking their personal problems before the unbelievers. In the Old Testament, in Israel, they had judges to judge among themselves. Ever heard of the elders of the gate? Yes, those were the men that sat there and judged. By the way, before you call somebody an elder of the gate, make sure that you want to go before him and get something judged, okay? That's what they did. Well, anyway, at least one of the things they did, I think they smoked their pipes and drank tea, too, or coffee. Well, anyway, Deuteronomy 16:8 is a reference to one. You can look it up sometime. And then they had daysmen that helped to settle the disputes. The daysman would be an arbitrator who would talk to both sides and get them to come to an agreement. And when they got done, when the daysmen got done, both sides were in agreement. They loved each other. It wasn't that one won and the other one lost. It wasn't, I'm okay, you're not, something like that. The Levites and priests also gave judgments. You can read that in Deuteronomy 17:8-13. Did I give you Job 9:33 for a daysman? You can look at that one. It's a good example. Job 9:33. But this one that deals with the Levites judging is in Deuteronomy 17:8-13. And if you defied the judgment of the Levite, you were killed. So you better listen to the judge, at least that judge. Now the Corinthians We're not going to a daysman or to an elder of the gate or to a Levite or a judge of that nature within the body, within the household. Instead, they went to the unbeliever judges who could make only sense knowledge judgments rather than spiritual judgments. But if they'd have gone to a believer, he could have made, at least had the potential for making a spiritual judgment rather than the sense knowledge judgment. That was a problem at Corinth. Now verse 2. Do you not know? Did I tell you, dare any of you, how dare you, was a rhetorical question? Yeah, well, here's another one in verse 2. Do you not know, or don't you know? There are 16 rhetorical questions in this chapter. That's all. He's trying to make some points. 6 of those rhetorical questions begin with this phrase, don't you know? Here's one of them. Verse 3 is another one. Know ye not? Don't you know that we shall judge angels? Verse 9 is another one. Don't you know the unrighteous shall not inherit the kingdom of God? You ought to know that. Verse 15 is another one. Don't you know that your bodies are the members of Christ? You ought to know that. Verse 16. What? Don't you know that he which is joined to a harlot's one body? You ought to know that. Verse 19 is the 6th one. What? Don't you know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit? You ought to know that. These rhetorical questions are just fantastic in Corinthians, I tell you. Especially this chapter. Because it's got 16 of them. But 6 of them start with this, don't you know? Now back to verse 2. And the word judge in this verse is krino again, to pronounce judgment. Don't you know that the saints shall judge the world? Hey, what were they doing? They were going before the unbelievers, the Roman courts, instead of before the believers. And he says, hey, wait a minute. Don't you know that the saints are going to judge the world? Here's another rhetorical question. And if the world shall be judged by you, are ye unworthy to judge the smallest matters of ethics? That was their problems. Had nothing to do with murder, rape. I mean, the big capital crimes. It had to do with their ethical things. Does that remind you of a record in Acts? Chapter 18, I believe. Gallio. They brought Paul before Gallio. What did Gallio say? I don't want to hear about it. Has nothing to do with Roman law. It was one of their ethical situations. Don't you think you're worthy to judge the smallest matters? Why do you want to go before the Roman courts? Verse 3. Don't you know that we shall judge angels? And that has to be, of course, the third that fell, the devil spirits. How much more things that pertain to this life? Another rhetorical question. Verse 4. And verse 4 should also be a rhetorical question. I'll show it to you. If then ye have judgments of things pertaining to this life, set them to judge who are least esteemed in the church. First of all, in the church should go after judge. And that last phrase should be a question. Do you set them to judge who in the church who are least esteemed? Why are you doing that? Who is least esteemed or despised? Bless you. Who is least esteemed in the church? The believers? No, it's the unbelievers. They were putting those despised unbelievers to judge believers. Now that shouldn't be. He says, look, one believer has a complaint against another believer. What do? Go to that believer. Go to a daysman. Go to a elder of the gate. Work it out. If then ye have judgments of things pertaining to this life, set them to judge in the church. Do you set them to judge in the church who are least esteemed? Well, you shouldn't be. I speak to your shame. Now, set them to judge. The Aramaic literally means to cause to sit, S-I-T, in judgment. Do you cause them to sit in judgment? The Greek word has a similar meaning, to cause to sit down. And in an official sense, that would mean to sit down in judgment as a judge. To set a person down as the judge. And the reason it's neat is because it's the Greek word kathizo, spelled K-A-T-H-I-Z, long O, kathizo. It's related to the Greek word cathedra, spelled K-A-T-H-E-D-R-A. Cathedra means chair. It's related to a Latin word from which we get an English word, cathedral. Ever heard of a cathedral? The reason it's called the cathedral is that's where the bishop has his chair, where he judges from. That's right. It's the bishop's chair. Cathedral. This word, the Greek word, cathedra, is also used of a teacher's chair or professor's chair and many other types of chairs. I think we use this term like chairperson, chairman, chairwoman. That idea comes from it, see? But you cause a person to sit down in the chair of judgment. That's the essence of this. And it should be a question. Matter of fact, the Revised Version so translates it. It has, if then you have a judge, or have to judge things pertaining to this life, do you set them to judge who are of no account in the church? See that? Do you set those to judge who are of no account in the church? That's the Revised Version. The New English Bible says, how can you entrust jurisdiction to outsiders, men who count for nothing in our community? Question. See it? Weymouth says, if therefore you have matters of this life to be decided, is it men who have no standing at all in the church whom you make your judges? You shouldn't be doing that. Rotherham, well, I added that. You shouldn't be doing it. Rotherham says, if then for matters of this life you have judgment seats, I like that. You have judgment seats. Them who are of no account in the assembly, these are ye sitting thereupon? Question. Estes translation. If then you do have judgments to make about things of this life, why do you set those to judge who are of no account in the congregation? Every one of those translates it as a question, and rightfully so. Because you don't want to put somebody in there that's despised in the church to judge, do you? No. He says, what do you think you're doing there, Sam? If then you have judgment things pertaining to this life, why do you want to set somebody on the judgment chair in the church who's not worth anything? An unbeliever. And that's what they were doing. That would make 16 altogether rhetorical questions in this chapter too. Verse 5. I speak to your shame. Is it so? Comes another rhetorical. That there is not a wise man among you, somebody that could serve as judge. You have to go outside to get a judge? I mean, there's nobody smart enough in this outfit? No, not one. Here's another one. No, not one that should be able to judge between his brothers? No wonder he said, I speak to your shame. But instead, what happens? Oh, by the way, that's in this verse here. That word judge, that's not the word krino. It's diakrino. D-I-A, krino. To make a distinction, to separate from another. Didn't we have that word before? Yes. That's after you've made the judgment, krino, then you can make the separation, the distinction between those that are right, those that are wrong, or what is right, what is wrong, after you've made that judgment. The Aramaic is even better. I give you the word, it's N-A-S-H-U-E. N-A-S-H-U-E. And it means to make an agreement. That's what they were after. Not after judging, but was to get them to come together like the daysman would do. To bring them together.